Tacitus Today, your pushback channel. And thank you for joining this audio, radio, no pictures live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you drive along in your car or your truck or on public transport. Put in those earbuds and become more aware of the issues in the world around you. Now, in this essay, I'd like to talk about an increasing amount of demographers, population demographics, an increasing amount of demographers that are pushing the line that, pushing the line that Western populations must, this is not negotiable, not up for debate or anything, populations in the West must increase. And if it can't be done through local births, then they must take mass migration. And why is this needed? Well, they don't really say. It goes off into sort of ideological tangents and who's going to do the work? There won't be any people. So they use the argument that the slightest decline in population, the slightest decline, means that suddenly there is nobody, not even a single person who can do the work. Suddenly there is nobody to look after the whole. No, hold on. If the population drops from 100 million to 95 million, does that mean there's no one in the country suddenly? So they use quite dramatic, binary. It's absolutely 0 or absolutely 100 type arguments, which are of course nonsense. Now they also cite statistics like the ratio of retirees to the number of babies being born, rather than comparing it to the number of workers that are needed or will be needed in the event of increased automation in the workplace and AI and so on. So they dismiss these factors as irrelevant and assume that we're kind of still living in the Stone Age almost. So when you look at their arguments in totality, they don't produce, certainly by my estimation, any convincing arguments at all. And it just so happens they parrot the globalist talking points that population must increase in the West, and because of that, we can already be doubtful of the claims and dubious of all the supposed research they do. Now, I was looking at one guy just as an example. Now he's touted as being a demographic expert, and he's a guy who got into academia. In fact, he never left school, and he talks like he's still talking to children. He never left school, and he's again lionized as being the big expert on demographics. But this is a guy who's never had a job, who's got a tenure for life, and he's never had to attend an interview, this sort of thing. And his children miraculously all got jobs, very, very well paid, prestigious jobs in banking and finance. And so you're looking at someone who's a paid up shill and propagandist who's pushed around. I saw him being interviewed recently, and the interviewer was very soft on the interview questions, didn't push back against any of the assertions, and didn't attempt to drill down into any of the supposed statistics and the little throwaway lines. So let's have a look at that now. And I want to dive in. There's some questions and I'll cover the following topics and questions. So 50 years ago, the average life expectancy was 69. I mean, depending on whose numbers you look at, by the way. And this assumes, I'm assuming the United Kingdom just as the sort of the example here, if you like, as a Western nation. Today, it's 82. How do you finance those extra 12 to 13 years of retirement? This assumes that people retire at 65. Fitter people, if they can, may work longer, which would substantially skew those stats. Also, we need to look at something that is never looked at, as far as I can tell, is the workforce total versus the productive workforce. And I'll give you some idea what I mean by that. In the United Kingdom, there are supposedly 10 million people of working age who are unemployed. Now, this also means, or in addition to that, there are close to 10 million that are underemployed. Now, underemployed meaning that you're I don't know, like a qualified engineer with experience, but you can't find a job as being a qualified engineer. So you have to accept a lesser job, or you're a fully qualified architect, but you can only get a job as a junior draftsman, those sorts of things. So the skill level of the person is not being fully utilised within the economy. Doesn't mean they're not working necessarily. It just means that their skill can't be used within the economy. And I mean a local actual qualification skill, not the supposed rocket scientist from Central Africa that are. I'm not talking about that, who ends up driving a taxi or for that matter, doing nothing. Now, this means if you look at the UK workforce of circa 40 million, again, depending on whose numbers you look at, that means 25% are unemployed, or 40 million people working age, rather. 25% are unemployed, and a further approximately 25% are underemployed. Now, this would suggest that they don't have a problem with population. Quite the opposite. They've got too many people. They've got so many people there they can't employ them productively. This then comes to the next sort of question, which is, should we be measuring productivity as we once did? The globalists have elected to see productivity not as individual productive factories producing widgets or individual people being productive and fully utilised skills, fully utilised time and hours, but they perceive the perception of productivity from a globalist perspective is, other than returns on funds employed through monopoly investments and so on and tax offsets, the productivity is through total mass of people consuming goods that are delivered through a monopoly sort of funnel or aperture. So, when it comes to water, food, accommodation, energy, those things will all be globalist, and in fact pretty much are today, all globalist monopolies, and you're required to buy from those monopolies. There won't be anywhere else you can go. You will only be able to buy, as you will only be able to consume your news through their controlled media outlets. You will only be able to consume the essentials of life through their monopoly-owned businesses. So productivity to them is the mass of people, not the productivity per person or per factory or per outlet, but the mass of people in totality and their capacity to profit extract from that mass, whether it's universal basic income or not. And that will be the measure of productivity. So we need to consider those things. Workforce total versus productive workforce, very important consideration, and then consumer mass through monopoly delivery of essentials of life. Now, there's also the idea of, if you're trying to measure productivity, the assumption used to be that you would have a job for life or close to it in your chosen profession. It could be engineer or whatever it might be. The higher the skill level, the assumption was the longer you would be in that profession. That's, of course, changed now because you have a rotating workforce in a gig economy. Somebody, the computer programmer who may be very highly paid for 6 months of the year may be having to accept a much lower paid job for 3 months of the year, maybe no job at all for another 3 months of the year. So that person isn't being productively utilised all of the time. And in a rotating people and jobs and rotating requirement gig economy, the idea of measuring productivity in the old way just simply isn't there anymore. Now, again, along with the consuming of monopoly-owned essentials such as housing and energy and so on, or renting accommodation, which will be communal. Which will be communal. We also need to look at the consumption of discretionary items. And it could be the blender or the mixer in the kitchen. You will share the kitchen, you will share the oven, you will share the refrigerator in a communally owned thing, a bit like the Soviets used to do. And I think, still happens in many, many parts of the world. So there won't be any private ownership other than your clothes, perhaps, and that'll be it. Now, this idea of trading productivity for consumer mass does require an ever-growing population. So I think this is where the demographic propaganda comes from. In a declining population, that model of total mass of people, as in the mass of people consuming monopoly, that is compromised by even a steady, let alone a declining population. So I'm reasonably confident that the growing population is relating to this trading off of productivity as versus the workforce total and total consumer, again, mass through monopolies. Now, in any service economy, as soon as you move away from manufacturing, and manufacturing's been sent overseas, China and India and wherever, so productivity has declined all across the West as manufacturing has been removed. Now, in manufacturing, you have control of many of the variables. You can decide, okay, we're going to make 100 widgets today. How many people do we need? How many machines do we need to do it? What are the raw materials? So you have control over many of the variables, and thus you can increase productivity by, for example, more automation, more efficiency, better training of the workforce, and so on. So whatever variables do exist, you can even minimize those because you can identify them, what they are, when they occur, how they occur, in what circumstances they occur, and apply fixes or getting increased equipment or expertise as required, better quality raw materials, whatever. But in a service economy, it's different. You still need someone to be in the shop, the clothing shop as an example. You still need someone to be in the shop, and you still need some sort of service, existing there for when a customer does come in. You can't control when the customers do and don't come in. And because of that, your resources you're deploying are standing down for a lot of the time, but they're there when they're needed. You're really paying someone to be there when they're needed rather than doing productive work as you would in a factory making widgets. Now, when you look at when you reduce any economy, you reduce the widget making and you increase the service side of the economy, you're paying a lot of people to be standing around for when they will be needed. Now, they're going to be needed, you just don't know when and for how long. And so productivity in the service economy is very low compared to a manufacturing economy, particularly an advanced manufacturing economy. So this causes productivity to decline regardless. And now into a low productivity economy, why would you want to stuff more people into it? You wouldn't. You'd look at ways of making the economy more efficient. And this is what's not happening currently. In fact, the reverse is the case. Not only is the economy inefficient in a productivity sense, but more and more people are being brought into the Western economies that aren't needed. If you've got close to half the working age population of the United Kingdom either unemployed or underemployed, why the fuck would you bring in millions more into an economy in that sort of situation? You wouldn't. But the fact that it's happening and aggressively being pushed indicates or not only proves, in my view at least, that productivity is not the issue here. Now, is it feasible, as some demographers are claiming, that for every person who's going to go into retirement or is slated for retirement, that it's feasible to require 3 or 4 new babies to be born in order to compensate for that? Well, of course not. I mean, the idea is absurd on a superficial basis without thinking about it. You go, oh, yeah, that makes sense, but it doesn't. Now, firstly, people are going to die and retire at different ages. Some are still quite healthy at 70 and working. Others can barely walk around the corner and they're 59 or 60. So there's different ages of health and different condition and so on. So this idea of everyone is automatically going to retire at this age and have exactly the same medical needs, of course, is quite absurd. That isn't going to happen. Similarly, just looking at Australia that has a national health scheme, rationing occurs, like rationing of medical assistance occurs. So if someone's, for example, someone's got an older person's got a bad knee or a damaged hip. If they are above a certain weight, then the medical authorities can say, well, look, there's no point in fixing your hip or your knee or whatever because you're so overweight that you're even the new knee that we put in is going to fall to pieces pretty quickly. So you have to reduce your weight to being X, or you have to have a better diet, or you have to. So they'll demand that you have to meet certain criteria before they'll give you the medical services. So in this way. And in other ways, they end up rationing the services to either if you're the black lesbian, they'll give it to you, but if you're the white sort of man or woman, then they'll ration it and demand that you supply certain behaviours in terms of health consciousness before they'll give you the service. They'll also keep you on long waiting lists, and so plenty of people die while they're on the waiting list, and thus performing a public service for the health services. Now, Japan is cited as a country heading for economic collapse. Now, they had a massive population boom in the post-war years, and I think their population they were pushing close to 140 million, or over 130 million at least. And I think they were the second most populous, per square mile type thing, country in the world, behind might have been Holland, I think, at the time. But anyway, they had a quite a large population growth, and because they had a very rigorous education system, they were able to have a very productive workforce, and they were a very export-focused economy. They made good quality products. They learned very quickly how to make better quality products. Some of their early products in the early 1950s were viewed with derision all across the Western world. If you wanted an example of something that was poor quality, you looked at it made in Japan, and everyone would have a laugh at the poor quality. 10 years later, that wasn't the case. They were already starting to acquire a reputation for quality products in things like musical instruments, some electronic goods, motor vehicles, and so on. So they had a booming economy, primarily export-based. They were quite frugal in many ways in their living habits, the Japanese. Certainly, the times that I went there, that was quite evident. But they were this idea of massive population growth and productivity growth was something that was very much part of the post-war, post-World War II era. Now, when productivity is increasing at a fast rate or a high rate because of new technologies, new methods of manufacturing, these sorts of things, then this idea of productivity outstripping costs means that because you've got such a high productivity, productive output, then it tends to be the situation that salaries or wages can increase faster than cost of living without causing inflation. And this was the case not simply in Japan, but elsewhere around the Western world. But in Japan, the idea of and they had very much even when I first started visiting Japan, it was very much accepted that girls would work from age when they left high school, would work for maybe 5 years or so, and then they would start get married, start a family, that sort of stuff. That thing slowed down very sharply in the 1980s. Some of it due to cost of living. And also the sort of jobs that were available. But this idea, Japan's cited as an economy or a country or a society that's going to collapse any day now, and that they should embrace mass migration of illiterate peasants from Africa and so on. And if they don't, it's going to... Now, this again indicates that it's a globalist. That's what the globalists are claiming. There's still this intense annoyance that the Japanese won't embrace mass migration, and the demographers are saying, well, if you want to have ethnic homogeneity, as Japan does, by the way, if you want to have ethnic homogeneity, then the price you pay for that will be societal collapse. I mean, that is utter absolute garbage. The Japanese are making huge strides in increased automation, increased robotization, and various other measures that mean they will have a far more efficient economy. which will need fewer people and will need fewer new workers. It doesn't mean that things aren't going to get done or won't happen or won't get manufactured. Far from it. What it means is that they're just going to a more efficient economy and they're utilising all their available resources to the maximum level. And this is something that I think is happening and needs to happen all across the West, or any advanced economy. And to illustrate this, I come back to Britain, where you've got 25% of working age people unemployed and a further 25% underemployed. The Japanese are trying to, and I think have been quite successful in many ways, are trying to make sure that that all those resources, all the available resources, are being employed for productive and useful pursuits. And in that way, excuse me, and in that way, they're going to, I think, have a it'll be a seamless process of transitioning from 130 million population to a 95 million population. And this idea that not a population 95 million is equivalent to a zero population again is absolutely idiotic, and I don't accept it even for a moment. So those are some of the issues that I wanted to go over, because they're not being covered. Now, some of the outlying things, I've mentioned this in other videos, is why do some places in the world, Israel as an example, that's a well-educated population with women participating in the workforce and so on, and women participating in the armed services and the like. Why is it that they can have, I think it's 2.9, 2.8, 2.9 or something like that children per woman today? Why can they have that when Western countries can't? So clearly it's not just women's participation in the workforce. It's not simply that women have more college degrees or something. It's not that. There's something more to it. And on this point, the demographers seem quite vague. They sort of shrug their shoulders, just it's cultural. Now, on other aspects, they say, well, if you're looking at the future with optimism, you're more likely to have children. I do get that. I do agree with that. But I don't think that's the only thing. And remember, Israel's surrounded by enemies and countries and places and religions that want them done away with. They want the state of Israel erased. And in spite of that, which could hardly cause people to be looking at the future with unbridled optimism, in spite of that, the Israelis are still procreating more so than many other parts of, in fact, any other part really of the advanced first world. So this is something that also could do with further exploration and explanation. That's about all I've got to say on this now. Let me know your comments below, and talk to you next time.